I know you spend a great deal of time focusing on the new phenomenon, the transition from unipolarity to multipolarity and what that entails for the entire world. One of the most interesting developments is, of course, the emergence of the BRICS bloc. I dedicate quite a bit of time here on my channel to it because I truly find it to be fascinating from an economic perspective as well as from a purely geopolitical stance. I think the BRICS has already succeeded in transforming the global distribution of power, and this is just the beginning. So with that being said, the BRICS bloc was founded 15 years ago, back in 2009. India is, of course, one of the founding members. In recent years, however, with the shift to multipolarity accelerating, the global power dynamic has changed dramatically. And I think we've all kind of been witnessing that. And without a doubt, the bloc itself has changed from a purely economic, let's call it partnership, to now starting to form its own parliament. How does India define its goals in the context of the BRICS bloc? And what do you feel the membership means for the country in the long run?
Sure. So, it actually started out as a BRIC, just BRIC. And it was a concept proposed by one of the Goldman Sachs analysts back in 2001. And he said, hey, these four countries are going to be the super performers over the next few decades or maybe even the 21st century. And at that time, Brazil, Russia, India, China, the BRIC, they didn't really maybe they didn't really even believe in themselves, so they just sat on the idea for a long time and they didn't do much. And then the 2008 financial crisis, it really woke up the world. And people just said, oh my God, maybe the American system is just a huge Ponzi scheme. How could they just let this mortgage crisis and all this fraud just go on and on for so many years and put the whole world at risk? So the financial crisis was sort of the triggering point and a wake-up call. And then in 2009, like you said, 15 years ago, the first time the four countries, they got together. And then the following year, they added South Africa, and then it became BRICS. But then even then, they went back to sleep. But they didn't do much. And they tried some things like the New Development Bank, which is the BRICS Bank, which was a very good initiative, but they gave out all the loans in the US dollar. They were still bound to the American system. So the New Development Bank didn't do much either. And BRICS did not want to antagonize the US. So they played a very low-key role. And this all went until 2022, when the US placed the shock and awe sanctions on Russia. And so people who understand geopolitics and who followed up with the events, they know that it's not Russia's fault, So for a whole, the US started the color revolution in Ukraine in 2004. They meddled with the internal affairs. They changed Ukraine against Russia, and they spent billions of dollars, as Victoria Nuland, she admitted in 2014. She was so proud. She said, well, our State Department spent $5 billion in propagandizing Ukraine. Well, she didn't say propagandizing, but she said spreading democracy, but it's the same. And then, you had George Soros, the neo-Nazis, the CIA, the NATO arming and training the Azov battalion, so all of that stuff. The leaders, they don't say much about it, or they don't say anything at all. But people in the foreign policy department in India and elsewhere, they know what happened. So they know it was the U.S. really provoking Russia, trying to take over the Black Sea, trying to turn Ukraine against Russia and to place missiles in Ukraine. So they were already very disappointed with the U.S. actions because there was no reason for the U.S. to go all the way across the world and to meddle in another country's affairs and to start a war with Russia, which has 6,000 nuclear weapons. Why would you do that? It's not very sane at all. So they were very disappointed, and then they saw the shock and awe sanctions. It was just unbelievable. Just on one day, they kicked Russia out of SWIFT, and they stole something like $400 billion of Russia's foreign exchange reserves. And this is just not acceptable. This is just theft. This is just weaponizing the dollar and the global financial system, which are supposed to be neutral. And people were so shocked. And one of the Indian billionaires, the CEO of a bank, so he called the dollar as the terrorist. And, he said it in a conference. And usually the Indian, the entrepreneurs, the billionaires, and so on, they are very nice to the U.S., So this was really shocking to hear an Indian billionaire call the U.S. as the economic terrorist. And that was a wake-up call, and that really rekindled BRICS. And then people understood, and especially the Indians understood, that we need a new multilateral system that is going to give people the option, So we don't have to bring down America or the dollar, but we need an option. So we have the freedom. We're not bound by the diktats of America. We don't have to be slaves who always bow to America, who says who we can trade with, where we can build ports, how we do the trade with, where we can buy the weapons. People don't understand how much the U.S. Spends its time bullying other countries around the world. They must have 1,000 people whose job is to micromanage nations around the world. It's really violation of the UN laws and the common sense. And it's also very hypocritical because the U.S. always talks about freedom, okay? They love the word freedom. It's they have to say that at least 50 times a day so they can go to sleep at night with a smile. But they don't give other countries the freedom to do what they want. If we want to build a port in Iran, the U.S. would say no. If Pakistan wants to buy natural gas from Iran, the U.S. would say no. If the Europeans want to buy very cheap natural gas from Russia, the U.S. would say no. And then if the Europeans don't listen, the CIA would go and blow up the natural gas pipelines. It's just really terrorism in so many aspects. So I think that India understood that they need this new multilateral organization, and BRICS, So now it's, we could call it the BRICS Plus. It might be the most, the consequential multilateral organization in the 21st century. And it really heralds the emergence of the multipolar world. Because the multipolar world, the concept sounds great, but we need the institutions to make it happen. How to trade, how to bank, how to do stock exchanges, the derivatives, the futures, how to coordinate. The investment, the infrastructure development. There are so many aspects, but you need a proper structure and a framework to carry out these goals. And we need that, because outside the developed nations, there are so many poor people in the world. There are billions of people who still don't have access to proper roads, electricity, internet, water, and all of that. And if we can raise those people, the whole world would benefit, right? And then it would be the U.S. and the Europeans. They would benefit from a wealthier, more prosperous global South. So BRICS is going to be the epicenter of all that action. And we can go into the problems later on, with India, China, and all of that. But that's the big picture.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that you sort of took a step back and looked at the BRICS bloc in the context of other foreign affairs, right? And the U.S. foreign policy. Because as you mentioned, U.S. foreign policy has never been non-interventionist. It's always focusing on interventions. And at the same time, while the United States seems to promote liberal democracy and freedom, and in the name of those things done regime changes and all of those other things, but humanitarian aid, for example, something that would have directly helped people in emerging economies, was never on top of our priority list. So I think that certainly shows the global majority, the extent of hypocrisy and the extent of the so-called exceptionalism that defines U.S. foreign policy and has defined it for decades now. When we focus on, let's say, India's foreign policy in terms of the two top goals of the BRICS bloc, which are de-dollarization and creating an alternative financial system, as you just mentioned, how does India work on those two things with the BRICS members? And what are the goals, let's say, in the next 1 to 2 years with respect to trade ties with China, with Russia, with Brazil, and South Africa, as well as other new BRICS members?
Mm-hmm. So we all understand the need for de-dollarization, because it's just a monopoly and is very abusive. Well, it's like a mafia system, so we need an alternative system to dollar. And it also, there are so many reasons why people need de-dollarization. So the number one is the cost, right? Why do you have to go through a middleman and pay commission in order to do something that could be done with the local currencies? So that's number one, reducing the cost. And then the time, obviously, it takes more time to bring in the American banks and to go through them. So that's number two. And number three is privacy. So when two countries, they trade, why do they have to let the U.S. know the details of the trade? There's no reason for the U.S. to know exactly what two countries are doing. Thus, when you de-dollarize, you gain more privacy. And number four is sovereignty, because the U.S., it uses the dollar as the cudgel to to hammer people on the head. And it bullies people. It tells people, the countries, what to do, what not to do. So when you de-dollarize, it gives the countries true sovereignty to do what they want. And it was actually mentioned by one of the U.S. Senators, the crazy man. I forgot his name.
It's Lindsey Graham.
The other one, the twin cousin, Marco Rubio, right? So he goes, "Oh my God! If de-dollarization takes off, then we cannot put sanctions on people." Hello, that's the whole point why people want de-dollarization. So that's a good thing. Why should one country be able to sanction anybody, to bully others? We don't see Russia do that. We don't see China do that. We don't see Germany do that. Nobody does that in the world except the U.S. It's really maniacal, to say the least. So that's number one. And last but not the least, in the long run, when you have to buy dollar for everything, it lowers the value of your currency. Right? So, for example, if India wants to buy the oil from Saudi Arabia, the coal from some other country, semiconductor chips from China, and so on, we cannot use the rupees most of the times. So then we have to exchange our rupees for the dollar, or we have to sell our labor to the U.S., So we have to say, hey, America, we are going to do the tech support for you at a very low price because we really, really need the dollar to buy the oil. So it gives the U.S. an enormous negotiating power. The U.S. says, well, if you don't have the dollar, you cannot buy the oil and nothing works in your country. So then you have to work, so you have to do, then you have to assemble the iPhone for 50 cents an hour. You have to do the tech support for $1 an hour, whatever. So they get to have this huge negotiating power, and they get to exploit people all over the world. But now, with the financial system that the U.S. Created after 1971, it's a very distorted system, and that needs to go away. So we totally understand the need for de-dollarization, and India is working with several countries like the UAE to buy the oil in rupees. We buy a lot of oil from Russia with the rupee, although they're not too happy. The Russians are not too happy. So there's a trick in the use of the local currencies. They work the best when the trade is balanced. So like if we buy $500 billion of goods from some country, and then we sell $500 billion of goods to that country, then you can do the trade in the local currencies. It makes a lot of sense, like it balances it out. But if you have a lot of trade imbalance, like we buy a lot from Russia, but we don't sell a lot to Russia, then in that case, Russia is, has to hold on to a lot of rupees, which they cannot very easily use to buy other stuff around the world. So that's a problem. But that's where the BRICS, the currency, some sort of an agreement. So I don't know how it's going to work out. Maybe a basket of currencies or something that's backed by gold and commodities, maybe, the oil, gas, something like that, that could be worked out. So that needs to be seen, but that's the goal, and that's the vision, and it's not really rocket science. People can figure it out. It's all about technology, math. It's really about math. It really boils down to math in how they're going to do the BRICS currency. And then you need the technology like the blockchain to make sure that the power is distributed, so you're not going to create neither the hegemon like the US who can bully the other BRICS currencies. So to make sure that it's fully democratic, that's one thing to consider. And then the legal aspects, because each country has different rules about the flow of money, the exchange rate, and so on. But with all the smart people in Russia, China, India, Brazil, etc., they can figure this out. And I think, so we can go into that later, but there is a reason why the BRICS expansion is not happening so fast.
Right.